have the pleasure of the company of Mr. Kiran Kothekar, founder and director, Vector Consulting Group. Mr. Kothekar will be sharing his insights on how does one effectively manage supply chain in a world increasingly disrupted by black swan events. A warm welcome, Mr. Kothekar.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Lovely. Mr. Kothekar, right off the bat, I would like your insights on, what were the significant challenges that supply chains were faced with in, recent black swan and grey swan events like COVID-19 pandemic, like the Russia-Ukraine war.
So we need to distinguish between what we call as black swan events for supply chains and for general life and the grey swan events. So like if you take the COVID-19 event, which was spread out over a long period of time, and it affected the whole world, right? And if you look at Ukraine as a disruptor, it is affecting a small portion of the world, and it is affecting a small portion of the supply chain as much affected by Ukraine and Russia, right? So we have to distinguish between these two. If you bring them together, then we probably arrive at a wrong direction. The important thing about COVID-19 was that it affected the world all over in two big things. One was that it reduced capacity to manage the supply chain all over the world. It reduced the number of people in the factories, it reduced the number of people to manage distribution, goods handling, all those things, right, or shops, management of shops, etc. In Ukraine, it is affecting the supplies from Ukraine in terms of the factories in Ukraine or what we were dependent on Russia for supplies, but Russia's supplies have not been disrupted. So we have to look at it from that angle. The second part is whether it is really a disruptor. For example, in terms of COVID, whether you were buying a mineral from China or you were buying a garment from Bangladesh or you were buying tea from Sri Lanka, everything was affected by the supply chain because the supply chain was disrupted completely. But if you look at Ukraine, maybe Ukraine, there is one specific mineral that comes from Ukraine, that and if it is say 50% of the world supplies, then it affects the supplies of the supply chain of the world. But if it is just 10%, then people will find alternate sources.
Fantastic. Yes, I'm glad you touched upon the chip shortage because that falls in a gray area. It's not really caused by either a black swan or a grey swan event. It could just be external factors there. So
yes.
Lovely. Thank you. Now, are firms' practices tuned to manage such disruptions effectively? And if not, what are the shortages or what are they lacking?
Yeah. So this is a question that I get many times as to how should firms be prepared for such events. First, let us qualify. When we term something as a black swan event, it's a large event nobody had predicted. So there is no point in saying that the supply chain should be ready for it, right? If you want to be ready for such an event, you will have a very, very inefficient supply chain, and that supply chain will die in no time, right? For example, somebody says that an event is going to affect my supplies for a year, right, and in a big way. Can you imagine somebody building up inventories for a year, right? That company is bound to die, right? It cannot sustain it, or it will just go back to the normal way of working in 2 months. So trying to be prepared for a black swan event is near impossible, and we should not do it, right? But there are other small actions that we can take to minimize the impact. We cannot completely address this big event. In terms of grey swan or small Ukraine type of events, if you see, the world supply chains have not been disrupted because it was not a place where there was one particular element or one particular supply or one particular mineral which dictated many supply chains in the world. It was not that. So people immediately found ways and means of circumventing the disruption there. So companies are prepared in that way. Are they prepared very, very efficiently? No. Yeah, some of them are, some of them are not, and we will discuss how they can do it.
Perfect. And that was actually my next question. How do companies build that resilience so that they can mitigate the impact and the risk of such events?
Yeah. So there are two ways in which you can mitigate any risk in a supply chain. One is by creating a lot of inventory buffers to take care of the disruption, but that's a very costly affair, and it also depends on what is the type of material that you are dealing with. For example, you are dealing with food items, perishables, things, medicines. These are not something that you can build up for a long period of time. Minerals, yes; metals, yes; auto parts, yes. So that is one distinction. The second part is that how much money is involved in this. Right? There are very few companies who can take this call of locking money for a long period of time. They are always trying to optimize the supply chain in terms of, because every company has expansion plans, every company wants to get into the new product and new market. For all this, the capital is required. You cannot lock it in one place. Your growth will get stagnant. But there is another part to addressing the issue, which is how fast can you react, right? Which is more of a mental model, right? It's about not having just capital, but it's how you design supply chains. For example, I am a company which takes, say, I'm a luggage manufacturing company, and I take because there is a cost advantage, I take all my hard luggage, for example, from China, right? And China's supply chain is disrupted. Now you are stuck, right? And you will be stuck. By the time you find another supplier, it could be 4 to 5 months, right? But what if you had built that capability? And the reason for this is because you place an order, they manufacture it for you, and then they give it to you. It takes about 3-4 months for the material to come and for you to sell. But if you had the factory in India, right, you could have reacted the next day, you could have changed the schedules the next day, you could have got the material within two days from the factory, say, which is in, say, north of India, or a place like manufacturing hub in Chennai or Pune. You could have easily got that material. You could have even asked them to set up, enhance their capacities by adding more people, because you have control and you have discussed. That's what I call reaction time. But then what is the biggest obstacle to this thinking? It looks like a no-brainer, right? The biggest obstacle to this thinking is that most supply chain think only cost. Cost per unit. How much have I reduced the cost per unit? Rather than looking at the company as a whole and saying, if I take this action, how much more sales and profit I can make, or how much of more sales I could have lost, I recovered. That's why I am saying it's more of a mental model of de-risking your supply chain and making it react fast.
Very interesting. That's a very different way of looking at the supply chain model itself. Can you elaborate how companies can use the rapid reaction model of pull, to be able to manage their supply chains more effectively, more efficiently, like you explained?
Yeah. So just now we spoke about a simple solution about if my supplier was not so far off in another country, my reaction time is. So when we say pull, people generally relate it to saying pull means I have a small buffer and I keep filling it up, right? But pull is also about how fast am I reacting to the market situation, right? I could react in 3 months, I could react in 2 months, or I could react in 2 days. The moment I have the ability to react in 2 days or 10 days, I have a ability to react to any demand fluctuations, right? That is essentially the pull model, that whatever you are reacting to sales immediately, that is essentially in essence the pull model, not that one buffer, one inventory buffer fills up another inventory buffer. Yes, those are used as a mechanism. So if I can reduce, so if I want to build a reaction model, if a pull model, then first thing I have to look at is what are my lead times and how can I reduce them, how can I crash them, right? Look at a garment supply chain, a branded garment supply chain, like say the US. It buys the products from Bangladesh, right, because it gets the product the cheapest in, say, Bangladesh. But the lead time is, by the time you give it to them, get the fabric and get the material into your warehouses, into the shops, it's about 6 months. And that is also because you react season to season, right? But what if you now change your thinking and you say, I want the reaction to be only 1 month? That means I will be able to react to my sales, whatever is happening in sales, whether they are going up or down because of events, not or just market dynamics, then I have built a supply chain which is literally a pull system or a reactionary supply chain. Or you take go to any company like an automobile company or something, you want, they'll sometimes say, you go to say, I want a black car, okay, come after a month. But if you look at the production time of a car, they all, you must have heard this, every minute a car comes out of the factory. Then why are they saying that I require a month to sell, and then I lose sales because somebody says, okay, you don't have this, I am going to buy another brand because there is an analogous brand. This is also a disruption, by the way, right. Then if I build a reaction, if I build a supply chain which is saying, okay, he asked for it, I gave it the next day, right, that requires a different thinking altogether in terms of production, in terms of parts availability and so on and so forth, right. This is what I mean by a reaction system. Now, in disrupting events like Ukraine or something like that, if you are having, you are buying something from Ukraine, it is taking it's a 6-month lead time, you are bound to get affected. But if you had a supply chain which could get that material in 1 month, by the time you got the feelers, you could have easily built up stock in order to find another supplier in another country, and you could have taken care of it. This is what I mean by the leverage point of building reactionary supply chains or pull based supply chains is lead time. But the supply chains of the world focus on cost per unit, and that is where that's where the disconnect happens. And actually, as a matter of fact, those companies which are struggling to make good margins, they focus more on cost, and their supply chains lead times are getting longer and longer.
Well, thank you for those examples that kind of help explain the pull-based model. I want to ask you one question for, if you can share a few examples of this model. How does it specifically work when it comes to a black swan event? While the ones that you elaborated are specific to supply chain disruptions itself, but when it comes to a black swan event?
So, as I mentioned before, black swan event, you cannot have a supply chain to take care of the black swan event. What you can build resilience to reduce the impact of the black swan event. Now, let me give you an example of some of our clients. We were working with a tractor manufacturing company, and when the COVID hit in March, and the the season for farming starts in June, July, and the rains, etc., and that's where, and this is the peak season for buying tractors. Supply chain is disrupted, nobody is going to work, or the government had allowed some people to work, but very few people, there was restrictions, and there were protocols of how much you can produce. So, everybody's capacity was reduced dramatically. Now, you want to produce tractors. If I was on this long lead time, which means I plan 2 months in advance and then give a schedule to my suppliers, they had the schedule, they had, instead of 500 people in the factory, now they have 100. With that 100, now they are looking at the schedule and procuring. Now, there is another part manufacturer who is only have 25 people. He is able to manufacture much lesser because he is in a place where something has happened, right. But what if I now have this pull based model? So, I have seen a case of an auto OEM, a large truck manufacturer. They started the factory, they started getting material from suppliers. A truck is manufactured, is nothing but an assembly of say 5,000 parts. If one part is not available, the truck cannot be made. So, they were getting material every day, but not a single truck was coming out, and it happened for a month. So, the working capital got used up, but not a single truck is coming out, because they had given some schedule to some people, which is saying this is the item that I want in this time, and everybody is trying to meet, but they have now a lot of disruptions. People are not there, some people got COVID, 2 days ke liye factory band ho gaya, all that stuff was happening at that time. But if you have a pull based model in which there is no schedule, and you say this is the level of inventory that I have in my factory, if I consume, you give me that, the signal is only the consumption. So, even if I had 10 people, I knew exactly what item to produce. The other part was all these people had to buy raw material, and that time working capital crashed. So, if they had a schedule, they brought say 2 mm thick steel plate. Now, this guy is saying I want the part with 5 mm thick steel plate, I do not have the money to do it. But if I do go by this consumption, I will know, okay, this is what is required, let me get the small amount of material. So, in this case we followed this system, that means we said only reaction, only pull based procurement of parts. The tractor manufacturer could produce large number of tractors, and at that period, in that period it sold the highest number of tractors as compared to the competitor. So, this is an example of how the pull based system, even with lesser capacity, you are now with less capacity, you are only producing what is required, what is not required or not produced, and with that the company could sell. Did it achieve the numbers that it was achieving in the past? No, but it did far better than others. And this is what I said, you can build resilience, you cannot solve the problem, but you can build a lot of resilience. So, this is a small example of how in times of this crisis a pull based system, a fast reaction system really helps.
Mr. Kothekar, I would love your insights on, what is the advice that you'd like to offer organizations that are looking to optimize and mitigate the risks that their supply chains face.
Yeah. So, as I was mentioning, it's all about the mental model. Supply chains are built in the mind. So, the key changes, or the key the outlook that the companies have to change in order to build very super efficient supply chains, or supply chains that really differentiate from their competitors, is to look at, there are 2-3 things. First is don't look at unit costs, don't look at a cost per of supply chain per product or per supply, right, and instead of that look at the costs of the total cost of the whole supply chain. For example, if I want to build a fast reaction system, and I need to get material, instead of a month I have to get it in 10 days, production lead time is say one day only, but for that I need to take a half truck. If I want to take a half truck, I can do it in 10 days, but my per unit cost has increased, but my reaction time to the market has increased dramatically. I could take care of that cost somewhere else, because there are lots of opportunities. For example, I am inefficient in buying some raw material, and I reduce the inventory to half, I could take care of that cost. But then what stops people, this looks very logical, right, but what stops people from doing this is the whole mentality of controlling cost at every place, every unit, right. So, where does this come from? Large companies would have supply chain distributed into sections, and generally each section or each purchaser or each buyer or each entity, a warehouse manager or a distribution manager, has KPIs, and most of them in supply chain are about costs, right, and everybody is given a target to reduce those costs. The notion is that if everybody reduces cost, the total cost will decrease and my sale will increase. That never happens. The sum of all this don't add up to the total. A cost decrease in one place could have a big impact on the whole supply chain. So, what we say is find out what is the leverage point and look at that, improving that. In that process, some costs will be increased while others will reduce. Look at the total. I would go one step forward and say sometimes we may have to increase the supply chain cost in order to get a leverage in the market. And a good example of that is the fashion supply chain, the brands, the retail chain that you sell in the European country. The lead time is generally 6 to 8 months to get a product. By that time the fashion trends have changed, because then now this is the era of influencers. One big celebrity wears a different shoe and whatever you had planned goes for a 6, right. So, we need very fast reaction time, and in this, but then the whole supply chain is focused on what is the per unit cost, what is the per unit cost of the garment. Even if they get a 2% reduction, they will shift suppliers, right, and in that process the lead time might increase and then the reaction time decreases. But what if you increase it by 5%, but get it very fast, build a supply chain which is very fast, but that leads to you to capture the trend in the market and you sell, and fashion retail chains, as you know, have a lot of gross contribution, they could make more money, and this has been demonstrated by Zara already, right. So, this is the change that has to happen in order to build a very fast reactionary supply chain. This also helps you in taking care of the crisis situations. This also have to take care of the grey swan events. Black swan events is a different story altogether.
I want to thank you, Mr. Kothekar. Thank you for your time and sharing all of these insights. It will be very interesting for our viewers to go through this interview. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.